Hey writers, creative souls, word witches, thanks so much for tuning in. I'm happy that you're here. My name is Johnny. I'm a published fiction writer and a retired adjunct writing professor. For 2 decades, I help college students get their words on the page. Now I teach fiction writing and screenwriting to adults in custody. I call myself a word witch, and I believe I'm on this earth to heal the world through stories, whether it's the ones that I write and tell or the ones that I help you write and tell. I'm new here on YouTube, and so I would greatly appreciate your help in growing my channel, because obviously the more people I can reach, the more I can achieve in my quest to heal the world through stories. Because as I always say, stories can heal the world, so let's do it together. Before we get started today, I want to mention my Alchemy of Writing membership group. We meet once or twice a week. The choice is yours. I'm on 2 times a week, Wednesday evenings and Saturday mornings Pacific time. You can opt to do 1 or 2. The price is going to go up the end of June, so I'm going to wait till through my birthday. Then the end of June, I'll be raising the price. So if you want to do it, hop on now. And we get together on Wednesday evening, Saturday morning, and we just write in silence. So it's a gathering with no talking. And it's ideal for people who just want a sense of community, but don't want all the talking that's often involved in groups. And then I do have a monthly Q&A for people who want to ask questions about writing in general or about their specific writing project. And that happens on the last Thursday of the month. Today, I want to try something a little bit different, and I would love to hear what you think about it. And if it's something you like, I would be happy to do more of these. So one of my favorite things to do in terms of writing and reading is to deconstruct and analyze stories. And we do this all the time when I'm teaching, and I use stories to give examples of different types of writing devices that are used. And then we also look at theme, and we analyze the story and look for the underlying message in the story. And so that's what I want to do today. Because I think in doing this, we can really learn how to add texture and layers and dimension to our stories, right? Rather than just write stories about A, B, and C happened. It's always nice to come away from a story with this deeper meaning that kind of stays with you. So I'm going to read you a story today, and I will put an image up on the screen. I have selected some water, and it was a little tricky finding the right water. Some of it I thought would make me seasick if I sat there and just watched it while I listened to someone read. Or you can close your eyes and just listen to the story, whatever you prefer. And if you want to give me some ideas about images you would like to see on the screen with these, let me know, and I will see if I can find them. If you're not driving or something like that, I think it might work best if you can just sit back and close your eyes and listen. Because how long has it been since someone has read you a story? Before we get to the reading of the story, I want to mention that this is one that I have used numerous times in various workshops, and I get mixed reviews on it. The name of the story is Neighbors by Raymond Carver. And I chose it because there's a lot going on in it, and it's a great way to really kind of showcase what Carver does best. If you don't know his work, he's considered a minimalist. So he uses short sentences, no flashy language, very, very few descriptors. And what he's able to do, though, with this sparseness in his writing, he packs so much emotional punch in his stories, and I think that's a true gift and an art. And so that's why I like using some of his stories in my workshops. And this one in particular has a lot going on that I thought would be fun to talk about. Carver became one of my idols many, many years ago in I think it was my very first writing class. And the person who was teaching it noticed kind of thematically what my stories were about and the vein in which I write, and so she recommended him to me. And she was right. Finding his work taught me that I could write about this blue-collar life that I grew up in as a kid, because I used to think, who's going to want to read stories about the things that I've experienced? But reading his work showed me that no, you can do it. And so it got me very excited about writing. It made me feel in some way accepted, because I feel like the literary community can be so snobbish and elitist, and it was really encouraging to me and validating to me to find his work. So that's why we're starting with him. The reason people have had mixed reviews on it, oftentimes these have been in my writing through the body workshops that I do when I teach my method. And for whatever reason, not always, but in large part, they are attended mostly by women. And there's something about the things that happen in this story that really have turned them off. But I think what's important is, there's the age-old question, do we want to write stories and characters as we would like the world to be? Or do we want to write stories and characters about the world as it is? And I suppose the answer is both, sometimes depending on, the given story and our intention with it. But to me, what really good writing does, it really kind of lifts the lid and makes us look under the surface at human behavior and the human condition. And that's what this story does. And I will agree, the male of the lead couple in this story, he does some things that are just not okay. But when we look at why he does these things and what's going on under the surface, then he becomes, I think, a lot less creepy. There is no violence in this story. It's not even really R-rated. And I will not read you stories that have blatant violence or things that might be triggering for people. If I do find a story that I feel like just needs to be read and discussed, then I will give a warning at the beginning and you can decide whether you want to listen or not. I will put a link to a PDF in the description below so that you can, however you want to do. If you want to listen first and then print it to have it, if you want to print it and follow along, if you want to get it up on the screen and follow along, rather than watch this moving body of water that I've mentioned, it's up to you, but it'll be down there. After I read, I will be back at the end and I will analyze it and discuss it, and then I would love to hear your comments. So here we go. Neighbors by Raymond Carver. Bill and Arlene Miller were a happy couple, but now and then they felt they alone among their circle had been passed by somehow, leaving Bill to attend to his bookkeeping duties and Arlene occupied with secretarial chores. They talked about it sometimes, mostly in comparison with the lives of their neighbors, Harriet and Jim Stone. It seemed to the Millers that the Stones lived a fuller and brighter life. The Stones were always going out for dinner or entertaining at home or traveling about the country somewhere in connection with Jim's work. The Stones lived across the hall from the Millers. Jim was a salesman for a machine parts firm and often managed to combine business with pleasure trips, and on this occasion, the Stones would be away for 10 days, first to Cheyenne, then on to St. Louis to visit relatives. In their absence, the Millers would look after the Stones' apartment, feed Kitty, and water the plants. Bill and Jim shook hands beside the car. Harriet and Arlene held each other by the elbows and kissed lightly on the lips. "Have fun," Bill said to Harriet. "We will," said Harriet. "You kids have fun too." Arlene nodded. Jim winked at her. "Bye, Arlene. Take good care of the old man." "I will," said Arlene. "Have fun," said Bill. "You bet," Jim said, clipping Bill lightly on the arm. "And thanks again, you guys." The Stones waved as they drove away, and the Millers waved too. "Well, I wish it was us," Bill said. "God knows we could use a vacation," Arlene said. She took his arm and put it around her waist as they climbed the stairs to their apartment. After dinner, Arlene said, "Don't forget, Kitty gets liver flavor the first night." She stood in the kitchen doorway, folding the handmade tablecloth that Harriet had bought for her last year in Santa Fe. Bill took a deep breath as he entered the Stones' apartment. The air was already heavy and it was vaguely sweet. The sunburst clock over the television said 8:30. He remembered when Harriet had come home with the clock, how she had crossed the hall to show it to Arlene, cradling the brass case in her arm and talking to it through the tissue paper as if it were an infant. Kitty rubbed her face against his slippers and then turned onto her side, but jumped up quickly as Bill moved to the kitchen and selected one of the stacked cans from the gleaming drain board. Leaving the cat to pick at her food, he headed for the bathroom. He looked at himself in the mirror, and then closed his eyes, and then looked again. He opened the medicine chest. He found a container of pills and read the label, Harriet Stone, one each day as directed, and slipped it into his pocket. He went back to the kitchen, drew a pitcher of water, and returned to the living room. He finished watering, set the pitcher on the rug, and opened the liquor cabinet. He reached in back for the bottle of Chivas Regal. He took 2 drinks from the bottle, wiped his lips on his sleeve, and replaced the bottle in the cabinet. Kitty was on the couch sleeping. He switched off the lights, slowly closing and checking the door. He had the feeling he had left something. "What kept you?" Arlene said. She sat with her legs turned under her, watching television. "Nothing, playing with Kitty," he said, and went over to her and touched her breasts. "Let's go to bed, honey," he said. The next day, Bill took only 10 minutes of the 20-minute break allotted for the afternoon and left at 15 minutes before 5. He parked the car in the lot just as Arlene hopped down from the bus. He waited until she entered the building, then ran up the stairs to catch her as she stepped out of the elevator. "Bill, God, you scared me. You're early," she said. He shrugged. "Nothing to do at work," he said. She let him use her key to open the door. He looked at the door across the hall before following her inside. "Let's go to bed," he said. "Now?" she laughed. "What's gotten into you?" "Nothing. Take off your dress." He grabbed for her awkwardly, and she said, "Good God, Bill." He unfastened his belt. Later, they sent out for Chinese food, and when it arrived, they ate hungrily, without speaking, and listened to records. "Let's not forget to feed Kitty," she said. "I was just thinking about that," he said. "I'll go right over." He selected a can of fish flavor for the cat, then filled the pitcher and went to water. When he returned to the kitchen, the cat was scratching in her box. She looked at him steadily before she turned back to the litter. He opened all the cupboards and examined the canned goods, the cereals, the packaged foods, the cocktail and wine glasses, the china, the pots and pans. He opened the refrigerator. He sniffed some celery, took 2 bites of cheddar cheese, and chewed on an apple as he walked into the bedroom. The bed seemed enormous, with a fluffy white bedspread draped to the floor. He pulled out a nightstand drawer, found a half-empty package of cigarettes, and stuffed them into his pocket. Then he stepped to the closet and was opening it when the knock sounded at the front door. He stopped by the bathroom and flushed the toilet on his way. "What's been keeping you?" Arlene said. "You've been over here more than an hour." "Have I really?" he said. "Yes, you have," she said. "I had to go to the toilet," he said. "You have your own toilet," she said. "I couldn't wait," he said. That night they made love again. In the morning, he had Arlene call in for him. He showered, dressed, and made a light breakfast. He tried to start a book. He went out for a walk and felt better. But after a while, hands still in his pockets, he returned to the apartment. He stopped at the Stones' door on the chance he might hear the cat moving about. Then he let himself in at his own door and went to the kitchen for the key. Inside, it seemed cooler than his apartment, and darker, too. He wondered if the plants had something to do with the temperature of the air. He looked out the window, and then he moved slowly through each room, considering everything that fell under his gaze, carefully, one object at a time. He saw ashtrays, items of furniture, kitchen utensils, the clock. He saw everything. At last he entered the bedroom, and the cat appeared at his feet. He stroked her once, carried her into the bathroom, and shut the door. He lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling. He lay for a while with his eyes closed, and then he moved his hand under his belt. He tried to recall what day it was. He tried to remember when the Stones were due back, and then he wondered if they would ever return. He could not remember their faces or the way they talked and dressed. He sighed and with effort rolled off the bed to lean over the dresser and look at himself in the mirror. He opened the closet and selected a Hawaiian shirt. He looked until he found Bermudas, neatly pressed and hanging over a pair of brown twill slacks. He shed his own clothes and slipped into the shorts and the shirt. He looked into the mirror again. He went to the living room and poured himself a drink and sipped it on his way back to the bedroom. He put on a blue shirt, a dark suit, a blue and white tie, black wingtip shoes. The glass was empty, and he went for another drink. In the bedroom again, he sat on a chair, crossed his legs, and smiled, observing himself in the mirror. The telephone rang twice and fell silent. He finished the drink and took off the suit. He rummaged through the top drawers until he found a pair of panties and a brassiere. He stepped into the panties and fastened the brassiere, then looked through the closet for an outfit. He put on a black and white checkered skirt and tried to zip it up. He put on a burgundy blouse that buttoned up the front. He considered her shoes but understood they would not fit. For a long time he looked out the living room window from behind the curtain. Then he returned to the bedroom and put everything away. He was not hungry. She did not eat much either. They looked at each other shyly and smiled. She got up from the table and checked that the key was on the shelf, and then she quickly cleared the dishes. He stood in the kitchen doorway and smoked a cigarette and watched her pick up the key. "Make yourself comfortable while I go across the hall," she said. "Read the paper or something." She closed her fingers over the key. He was, she said, looking tired. He tried to concentrate on the news. He read the paper and turned on the television. Finally, he went across the hall. The door was locked. "It's me. Are you still there, honey?" he called. After a time, the lock released, and Arlene stepped outside and shut the door. "Was I gone so long?" she said. "Well, you were," he said. "Was I?" she said. "I guess I must have been playing with Kitty." He studied her, and she looked away, her hand still resting on the doorknob. "It's funny," she said. "You know, you go in someone's place like that." He nodded, took her hand from the knob, and guided her toward their own door. He let them into their apartment. "It is funny," he said. He noticed white lint clinging to the back of her sweater, and the color was high in her cheeks. He began kissing her on the neck and hair, and she turned and kissed him back. "Oh, damn," she said. "Damn, damn." She sang girlishly, clapping her hands. "I just remembered. I really and truly forgot to do what I went over there to do. I didn't feed Kitty or do any watering." She looked at him. "Isn't that stupid?" "I don't think so," he said. "Just a minute. I'll get my cigarettes and go back with you." She waited until he had closed and locked the door, and then she took his arm at the muscle and said, "I guess I should tell you, I found some pictures." He stopped in the middle of the hall. "What kind of pictures?" "You can see for yourself," she said, and she watched him. "No kidding," he grinned. "Where?" "In a drawer," she said. "No kidding," he said. And then she said, "Maybe they won't come back," and was at once astonished at her words. "It could happen," he said. "Anything could happen. Or maybe they'll come back and—" But she did not finish. They held hands for the short walk across the hall, and when he spoke, she could barely hear his voice. "The key," he said. "Give it to me." "What?" she said. She gazed at the door. "The key," he said. "You have the key." "My God," she said, "I left the key inside." He turned the knob. It was locked. Then she tried the knob. It would not turn. Her lips were parted, and her breathing was hard, expectant. He opened his arms, and she moved into them. "Don't worry," he said into her ear. "For God's sake, don't worry." They stayed there. They held each other. They leaned into the door as if against a wind and braced themselves. All right, so what is going on here in this story? So we have Bill and Arlene Miller, who are the protagonists in the story. Bill is mostly, but Arlene is closely connected. And the very first line of the story tells us that they are a happy couple. But are they? As we read, it really seems that something is missing. And even in that first paragraph, we are told that, we see these comparisons between them and their neighbors, the Stones. And we can see that they have this kind of subtle envy because the Stones get to travel a lot. And it sounds like Bill and Arlene are a little humdrum about their life, right? And they just do their jobs and come home and have dinner. They lead very different lives than the Stones. So in the story, they are charged with taking care of Kitty, the Stones' cat, and watering their plants while they're gone on this most recent vacation. And so what does Bill do? He slowly, day by day, infiltrates himself into their home in ways that really are uncomfortable to read about, right? So he takes Harriet's bottle of prescription pills and puts them in his pocket. He eats food from the refrigerator. He pockets a partial pack of cigarettes. He drinks their alcohol, and he drinks the good stuff that's kept in the back of the cabinet. And he probably knows this because he's been over there before. And, you know, Jim Stone has probably served him a drink from the good stuff that he keeps in the back, the bottle of Chivas Regal. And he even puts on their clothes. He goes into their bedroom and he tries on their clothes, both of them. And so in the process of all this, then he goes back home and all this makes him a little bit frisky, right? With Arlene. And at one point she says, "Good God, Bill, what's wrong with you?" Right? And then we have the day when Arlene goes over to take care of the cat, and she returns, and we, along with Bill, can see that she has also been lying on the bed because he sees the white lint from the bedspread on the back of her sweater. And so earlier, Carver told us that it's a fluffy white bedspread. The only reason he described the bedspread is because he refers to it later. Only reason. Because like I said earlier, he just doesn't get into deep descriptions of anything. He described the clothes that he put on, right, to give us a little bit of a visual so we could picture him in them. But he really doesn't do a lot beyond that. So as I mentioned before, Carver shows us early on in that first paragraph how the Millers and the Stones lead very different lives. And then he also shows us this difference when the first time he enters the home, he has a little bit of an aside, and Bill thinks about the time that Jim and Harriet came back from a vacation, and Harriet brought over this amazing clock that she brought home, and how she held it like an infant, right? So he shows us these things just very briefly to show us the stark difference between them, and to help us understand why the Millers might be somewhat envious, right? Because Harriet is holding the clock as if it's something precious. And then there's that moment when Bill is over in their house and he takes the cat. He does give it a pet first, but then he puts it in the bathroom and shuts the door because he really doesn't want to be bothered, right? And it's almost like he doesn't even want the cat to see what he's doing. So he really can be viewed as a voyeur who's very self-involved and thinks only of himself. But maybe he has a bit of a conscience. So I would love to know what you think. Does he put the cat in the bathroom so he's not bothered? Or does he do it because he doesn't want to be seen doing what he's doing by the cat? And so this is also one of the things when I've used this in workshops that, you know, he just comes across as so self-involved and so selfish. And then I also think him putting on Harriet's undergarments really unnerves people because his behavior really is appalling, right? Like, we just don't do that when we house sit for people. Or if we do, we don't tell anyone, right? And so that's, again, what I love about Carver and about this story is it gives us a glimpse. And who knows, maybe more people do this than I'm imagining. When I've house sat for people, I've never done this. I don't go through their closets. I don't go through their medicine cabinet. I truly don't. I would feel very awkward doing that. I feel like people's personal spaces are very sacred. And so maybe that's what fascinates me about this character in this story. It's that he's so brazen. He's ballsy enough to go in and do these things. But again, when we think about what's underlying his behavior, to me, that's the really interesting part. So there's that moment when he's wearing Harriet's clothes. He's put on a skirt and a blouse of hers, and he's peering outside from behind the curtain. And this struck me as something that Shakespeare did in his plays, where one character will put on the clothing of another, and so it's like an identity swap or an identity shift or change. And to me in this story, it strikes me that in that moment, Bill is looking out through the curtain outside to me, that's symbolic of seeing the world through Harriet's eyes. Bill also looks at himself in the mirror twice in this story. And I've been told that, oh, that's a cheesy device, don't use it. But sometimes it makes sense to have a character look in a mirror in a story. And so what does that symbolize? Well, it can symbolize them looking at themselves, reflecting, looking at their own reflection, and really trying to see, like, who am I? And even the first time he does it, it's in the bathroom when he takes Harriet's pills and puts them in his pocket. It says that he looks in the mirror, closes his eyes, and then looks at himself again. And so to me, that means that he's almost like he's closing his eyes, hoping to see something different the second time. And then there's the section where he is going through their home and he's taking in every item, it says, very slowly. And it's almost like he's absorbing all of the items in their home. He's trying to absorb them. And it even says that he's forgetting what they sound like and look like. So it's like he's trying to, in his mind, push them out of the picture and absorb their life into himself. And then it's right around that time, shortly after that, he is in their bedroom, lying on their bed, and he rolls off and looks in the mirror again. And so it's like he's trying to check a second time, like, now who am I? Now who am I? Am I the same person? And that second look in the mirror when he rolls off the bed, that's when he decides to try on their clothes. So this is when then he's gone through, he's tried to absorb all their belongings, the significance of them into himself. Then he goes and lies on the bed, he rolls off, he looks in the mirror, and then he proceeds to put on their clothes. Okay, so what is the meaning of all this? And I'll get to the end in just a minute, but obviously he's missing something in his life, right? And they both are, because what do we learn? So if we can for a minute put aside creepy Bill and just think that there's this void in himself that he's trying to fill. And then we learn also that Arlene is doing the same thing, because then they have this meal together one night at their home, at their own home, and they don't talk. Neither of them eats much, so they're both a little like upset, and we're not really told, but we can infer a lot from that. Maybe they're upset because they're really coming to terms with the fact that there is something missing in their lives. And so all of this is really starting to affect them. And then Arlene goes over to take care of the cat, and when she's been gone too long, in Bill's estimation, he goes over and finds the door locked. And so he knocks, and she comes out, and they go home, and then she confesses to him that she found pictures. And he gets curious, and so when they both go over together, that's when they discover that, oh shit, the key has been locked inside. And so I want to read these last lines again. They stayed there. They held each other. They leaned into the door as if against a wind and braced themselves. All right, so I'd love to know what you make of the ending. What are they bracing against? Are they bracing against returning to their own boring lives together? Are they bracing against being found out? What do you think? And also, thematically, I would love to know what you think this story is about. Is it about boredom? Is it about voyeurism? Is it about feeling true lack, like hollowness inside, and trying to fill it? And do you have a sense about what direction Bill and Arlene's relationship might take after this? Do you think this will bring them together? Will it pull them apart? Of course, we don't know, but based on those last lines, where do you think this leaves them? All right, so that is it for this story. Let me know if you liked this, and I would love your comments about how you interpret the story, because I'm interpreting it myself, and I am not saying this is the only way it can be analyzed and interpreted. So I would love to know your interpretations and how you think this leaves them at the end of the story, and if you would like me to do more of these. All right, as always, I send you mad writing mojo. Happy writing.